내 안의 빛을 깨워라. 어웨이크닝 TV. 구독과 좋아요 부탁드립니다.
I think this is one of the most remarkable aspects of a near-death experience, and it's one that's not really given the amount of attention that it should. Obviously, many people know about the light, they know about the out-of-body experience, but the thing that really is, I think, important about the near-death experience, and in regard to the life review phenomenon, is it isn't just a life review. It's a reliving of your life. And when people describe this, it's not always done in this way, but when people describe the full experience, it's every single act that you have done, every single thought that you have thought, every single word that you have spoken, suddenly all of this is back with you. You are running through it again, and as you say, you see and you experience the effects of these acts, these thoughts, and these words on other people. Let me just give you one brief example to illustrate this. I have a friend who who, when growing up, was kind of a roughneck. He had a hot temper, and he was always getting into scrapes. And one day, he was driving in his truck through the suburb of the town where he lived, and he almost hit a pedestrian. And he got very aggravated at this pedestrian, and he was a very big physical guy, still is. And a fight ensued, and he punched this guy out and left him unconscious on the pavement, got back into his truck and roared off. 15 years later, this guy has a near-death experience. Oddly enough, it was caused by an accident in regard to his own truck at that time. But in any event, he has a near-death experience, and during the near-death experience, he has a life review. And in his life review, this particular scene of the fight takes place again, comes up in his life review. And he said that, as many people do, he kind of experienced this from a dual aspect. There was a part of him that was almost as if he were high up in a building, looking through a window and seeing the fight below. But at the same time he was observing the fight like a spectator, he found himself in the fight, except this time he found himself in the role of the other person. And he felt all 32 blows that he had rained on this person originally 15 years ago, now being inflicted upon himself. He felt his teeth cracking, he felt the blood in his teeth, he felt everything that this other person must have felt at that particular time. It was a complete role reversal, an empathic life review experience.
The implications of what you're saying are just enormous. It touches on ethics, it touches on theology,
yes.
It touches on psychology. It's reminiscent to me of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Mm-hmm. So just as you say, can you imagine what the life review of Hitler would have been like to have gone through? Because one of the things that people say about the near-death experience in regard to the life review is that you become aware of the consequences of your actions, whether you intended them or not, and even whether you are aware of the repercussions or not. So, I mean, if you think of all the ramifications of Hitler's decisions about how things were going to be done prior to and during World War II, not just with the Jews, but with all the atrocities. That man died over 50 years ago. You wonder whether his life review is over yet. Well, perfect justice.
It seems as if the life review takes place outside of our normal space and time.
It does.
Because it might take forever.
Yes. Yeah, I'm saying, I'm not really meaning literally that his life review is not over yet, but because people say in the near-death experience, and when they have the life review, that they are outside of time, and yet they can process all this information. And a lot of people, not to give it a heavy tone, because people have the near-death experience, they don't say, I don't want people to feel guilty about this. They say, it's like a learning experience. It's meant to show you something. Of course, Hitler obviously is the most extreme case that we can use. In the normal case, what people say about the near-death experience and what they learn from the life review is, it shows them something. It teaches them something. It is a teaching. It's not something that's meant as a punishment or to scare people. And none of my remarks should imply that. It's meant to wake people up so that they simply become aware of the consequences of their actions before committing those actions, knowing that they themselves are going to have to be the recipients of them. It's as if there's only one person in the universe, and it's us.
You write about one near-death experiencer, I believe, who became a friend of yours, and he was very eloquent and articulate about the nature of the light, that the light itself was composed of, if I recall correctly, it's as if it was the higher self of everybody.
Yes. I remember this particular man, and he had a very unusual experience because when he went into the light, he had a question, and he said, "What are you really? You know, what is this? What are you?" And he said that he was not just enabled to enter into the light, but he passed through the light. And when he could, as it were, look back on the light, he saw it was almost like a constellation of human souls, that it was everybody's higher self, as you were describing. And again, that had a tremendous effect on this particular individual. But his experience went deeper than most. And in one chapter, I know the one that you're referring to in Lessons from the Light, I present some cases like his of the deepest, the most complex near-death experiences that I've discovered in the course of my research. And in all of these, although I don't have many of them, as with this man, people go into and then through the light, and they seem to go almost as if on a journey through the universe, and they get to a second light. They get to something that seems to be the primordial light, or the light of creation, or the light of God. I don't even know what terms are adequate to describe it. This man was one of those who had something more like the full near-death experience, although obviously he never died, but he penetrated further than most people ever have an opportunity to do.
The sense that I have is that what these people are telling us is that my soul is linked to the soul of everyone else, that we are common, we share a soul in common, and that common soul that we all have links us to the absolute.
I think that's very well put, and I think what we have here in this world, we have a sense of division and separation. We are many bodies, but in the light, no pun intended, of the near-death experience, you realize there's only one being, and we are all connected to it. It's as if that primordial light that I was talking about that's where we really belong, that's where we really are. And so many people say, even when they enter into the experience of the light, I was home. One man said, "This is where I always was and always will be, and my life on earth was just a brief instant."
Ken, it strikes me that the most significant aspect of the near-death phenomenon overall is that it lends an enormous amount of credence to a world view which is very different from our conventional materialistic scientific way of seeing the world, and very similar to what Aldous Huxley referred to as the perennial philosophy, or Houston Smith calls the primordial tradition, the kind of basic assumptions that underlie the religions of the world.
I think it does connect with that, and one of the things that has struck me in my research on this phenomenon, and I think it's also true for other people who've looked into it, is that people who have this experience, almost regardless of their initial point of view, if they were religious or if they were not religious, if they were spiritual or not spiritual, if they were atheistic or not, they come to have almost a similar point of view along the lines of the perennial philosophy. They describe themselves as much more spiritual people, not necessarily more religious, and they make such statements as, "I feel as if I would be at home in any church," or "all religions have truth." There are a lot of pronouncements that if people were made by near-death experiencers, which if they were familiar with the idea of a perennial philosophy, they would have no difficulty in endorsing. I think this is a very beautiful aspect of the experience too, because it suggests that once you have this kind of awakening, whether through a near-death experience or in some other way, then you come to a point not only of this kind of realization, but you have a sense of tolerance and appreciation for the diversity of religious or spiritual world.
And when we talk about the light, my impression is that we're describing an intelligence. It's not just some sort of visual sensation.
Absolutely.
It's as if one is there in the presence of a great, comforting, wise intelligence, spiritual guides, for example, who help us to process.
Yes, there is an incredible intelligence. There is an energy associated with this light. There is a feeling of love beyond this world, of almost an absolute love. And that when people have the experience of the light, it isn't that they become aware of these dimensions. They become absorbed in them, and they understand that they are made of that light. You know, the light is not something that is other. It's that you merge with the light, and that energy and that intelligence and that love infuses itself into you. And that's why I think when people come back from this radiant experience, that they're almost like beings of light themselves. I mean, to the extent that they can remove, you know, kind of their ego dross, if I can put it that way. If they can remove that covering, then the light that they experience during their own near-death encounter shines through them. I think that's why they are so compassionate, so loving, and why they have this kind of knowledge.
To me, the one conclusion that is suggested by all of these accounts is that life has a purpose.
Yes.
And that is profound from the point of view of materialistic science, which says just the opposite.
And it's almost universal that near-death experiencers say that.
Yeah.
They say, I know that my life has a purpose. I know that life has a meaning. It is a big anecdote to kind of the bleak existentialism that was, you know, so common, say, in the mid-20th century. That point of view simply is not maintainable in the light of the near-death experience. The sense of purpose, the sense of meaning is so much a part of this experience that it cannot be extracted, nor can it be, I mean, it can't be doubted. It's an inextricable part of the near-death experience, and people who study it will understand that if those experiences give us a sense of meaning, then even those of us who haven't had the experience can be buoyed up by the fact that there is meaning and purpose to our world.
Dr. Kenneth Ring, thank you so much for being with me.
My pleasure, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being with us.